Hello, welcome to Conversations in Calvinism, as well as welcome to the Society for Evangelical Armenians YouTube channel. And my name is Dan Chapa, and I'm joined as always by my good friend TurretinFan.
Howdy.
Howdy. And we have, so I have got a debate coming up. It's going to be on the 9th on Provisionist Perspective, and it's going to be about penal substitution. It's with Will Hess, the author of Crushing the Great Serpent. So in preparation for that, we'll continue looking at Will Hess's book and some of his theological arguments in favor of his position, Christus Victor, and against penal substitution. And hopefully we can wrap up the theological arguments and start getting at least into some of his Old Testament exegesis and just start looking at passages. But the first part will be just focused on, I guess, wrapping up some of the key theological arguments that he's developed. This will be a continuation of last week's episode, which I encourage everyone to check out. So, with all that said, how have you been?
I've been doing well. It's a continuation of last week's episode, and there's a previous episode. In fact, if you saw the splash screen, it was like episode 38 of the 2025 season. And then also the episode 40, which was last week, and episode 41, which is today, are all on the same topic of this. Now, not the previous episode was responding to this book. The one before that was more like the church fathers with the book in the background of what we were talking about. But yeah, and it may not be the last. I'm not sure our overall plan on this. But now that I have the book. But I want to give a quick caveat. I haven't completely read the book yet. So all my, when I take all my comments that are characterizing the book with a huge grain of salt, considering that I haven't read the book. So it's very important up front to note that. However, you, Dan, have read the book. You have assimilated some of those ideas into the form of a presentation that we are going to use as kind of the launch pad for discussion. And I'm trying to think any other introductory thoughts. I think that's it from my side.
Right. Okay. Well, we can definitely launch right in. Hey, Discerner, welcome. So yeah, the PSA Atonement is based on the simple fact God does not bless unjudged sin. I appreciate that. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that.
Friendly says you, typical Dan, reading books.
Yeah. well, if everyone can see the evidence just behind you, that description might fit you as well.
At least I possess books, at least. Although not enough for my friend Mr. Preston. So I'll have to hopefully satiate his desire for book reviews by digging into this one. Crushing the Great Serpent, did God punish Jesus? And let's see, what's your and the bark barks is saying what's up.
What's up Bark? All right, let's launch right in. Let me I got this. There we go. Okay, so this is just, well, actually, let me back up. So this is from Crushing the Great Serpent, Did God Punish Jesus, by Will Hess. So we'll be looking at his theological framework. So we covered a bunch of different arguments last episode. So we're going to start in with the question of, does penal substitution conflict with Christus Victor? And so this quote is from page 28. If death is a punishment by God for all mankind, then why did Christ have to defeat it? Could not God have removed the curse of death after punishing Jesus? Now, this is in a section, and I think also Will has pressed this at different points. I think just trying to nutshellize it in both videos and the book from what's overall going on. I think Will gets a little frustrated because when he meets opposition, oftentimes they just say, well, Christus Victor is also true, and it's a part of penal substitution, or they do not compete with each other. And so he's trying to find some grounds to say, no, they are mutually exclusive. If you go with penal substitution, you can't go with Christus Victor. If you go with Christus Victor, you can't go with penal substitution. So my position very early on, it's just going to be, yeah, absolutely, Christ won the victory over the devil, death, and sin. He defeated them. And that was, a part of it. And I would just say that, frankly, penal substitution probably just is the best explanation that I'm aware of how he did it. Like in what way, in what manner did he defeat the devil, death, and sin? And that answer is through penal substitution. So I think this is pretty straightforward from my standpoint. But I don't know if you have some broad thoughts. I think it's just a very hard argument for Will Hess to make, that the two are mutually exclusive.
I haven't seen, I have never seen him make such an argument. I haven't finished reading the book, so I can't comment on his. And this question by itself doesn't resolve the question. But a short answer I would give to the question he's offering is something like 1 Corinthians 15, and where it says, "Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So Christ gets the victory, undoubtedly, but it's a victory over the legal problem of the punishment of sin, namely death. And our corruptible bodies need to be changed. And the primary way that God has chosen to do that is through death and resurrection. But some of us, whoever is around at the appropriate time, some of us will just be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. So there will be a change, and God doesn't have to kill off all humanity, but he has chosen to do that. He could transform all humanity as he will on the last day, or at what's called the last trump here. So at the last trump, he can do that, and he will for some people. So I wouldn't say it's mandatory, but the general point is that we participate in his death and resurrection. That's the way he's chosen to do it. So I don't know how he anticipates that objection, or how he answers it, or even if he has an answer, other than to embrace the fact that Christ gives us the victory over death. So I don't know.
Right. Well, I think the next question is kind of definitely related to it. So why don't we just move on to the next one? So the next objection is the resurrection irrelevant to PSA? So here's the argument. This is on page 96 of his book. If death is a punishment from God upon mankind as a judgment for their sin, why would his son have to die and resurrect to defeat the very judgment placed on mankind? So I think there's a part of it that the accurate part is, I guess, the focus of penal substitution is going to be on the death itself, rather than the resurrection itself. But they're definitely connected, even within the framework of PSA. But I would just also say that even if they weren't, which they are, and I'll try to explain that in a moment. But even if they weren't connected under PSA, PSA is not the sum total of all that salvation is, because you could kind of say, well, penal substitution gets you out of hell, but it doesn't necessarily get you into heaven. And through the power of the resurrection, we have, in addition to the forensic aspect of justification, through the power of the resurrection, we get new birth, sanctification, and ultimately glorification, which is also a different aspect of it, not just dealing with the legal debt of sin, but of our sin habits and nature, and sin's power in our life is destroyed through the power of the resurrection. So it's definitely part of the overall plan of salvation now. But so it's not just that Christ experiences death; he enters death as a substitute and exits it as justified. And it's the proof that the punishment is complete, that justice has been satisfied, and the debt is paid in full. So once the penalty of sin is dealt with, then sin habits are also defeated. So not just the guilt and the punishment are dealt with in PSA, but through the power of the resurrection, we have the new birth and sanctification and ultimately glorification. So we can be with God in heaven. So hopefully that helps and sums up my answer as to the resurrection. What do you think? This is an interesting one in terms of, well, what exactly is the resurrection's role in PSA itself?
That's a good question. I view it as that he's raised for a justification in the sense that his work, it's shown that he was not killed for his sin. As if he was killed for his sin, God wouldn't have raised him from the dead. So it shows that he's declared to be righteous, notwithstanding bearing our sins. But when I read the question that Hess is pointing out here, I took it maybe I'm taking it the wrong way, but I kind of took it a different way. I took it as saying that why did Jesus have to oppose the judgment of God? That seems to be how he's trying to frame it, as though God is judging mankind and the Son is coming along and fighting against God's judgment instead of God just not judging mankind in the first place, or something like that. But I think that if I've understood the premise, and maybe I haven't, but if that's one of the premises or one of the ways he's trying to take this objection, an answer I would offer him comes from Matthew 5, verse 17. Don't think that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Now, in order to fulfill the law, there has to be punishment for sin. And so if God were to just set aside the punishment for sin, the law would be destroyed, but not fulfilled. And so now if you say, well, why couldn't God just destroy the law? Why does he have to fulfill the law? That's a deeper question, I guess. But I think that the short answer is, given his plan to fulfill the law, not destroy it, then of course the answer is it's exactly because death is a punishment from God on mankind that Jesus had to die and resurrect to defeat that very judgment God placed on mankind. But I think the way I'm doing that is taking I'm de-emphasizing the and resurrect part of that answer, and maybe I'm doing him wrong by doing that. As I said, I haven't read the book in its entirety, so.
All right, fair enough. By the way, I have good news for you. Oh. So apparently William Albrecht beat you in a debate. So that means one debate, and that means you've won the other 740.
Well, was he saying that to me or to you or to us?
I don't know. I'm just joking around. I'm just playing.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I'll take the L. Yeah. But
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've definitely. It more logically would be me. I've debated William many times, and if he beat me in a debate, he beat me in a debate. But the truth is that we could go through the various topics we debated, but I'm confident about where the truth lies. So,
Well,
if I poorly approached it, that's on me. But the truth is, it's pretty abundantly clear, and we've covered some of those in the past. I don't want to get too distracted by that point.
Yeah, I was just joking around. But we don't have time to go through that whole list. Oh my goodness, you guys have been debating for a while. All right. Okay, the non-imputation of sin, and I don't want to spend too long on this because, I kind of, it's an important topic, but so the argument is, the glaring issue with this is that mankind is held guilty of Adam's sin for simply the crime of being born, and before they have chosen to do anything, they're held guilty of a crime they have not committed. There's a whole section addressing that, focus on individual accountability and that sort of thing. So I think it's extremely hard to maintain this position in the light of the scriptural evidence. I put together a list of verses, which, I won't go through much detail. I'm just going to read and briefly comment on them. Yeah, let me pop this in. That without getting into Romans 5, I just want to touch on how pervasive this is in the Old Testament of the idea of imputation of sin. I can understand why Will needs to take out the concept of imputation of sin, because it certainly is going to be a problem for his view once we get to sin-bearing passages when it talks about the Messiah. But that's not the only context in which imputation of sin applies. And I know that Will had a section on Romans chapter 5. I'd love to get into it. It's just going to probably be too long. But I just wanted to touch on a couple different texts in the Old Testament. So Genesis 9:25, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." So this is Noah. Noah curses Canaan, not his son, the one who did something. The son was the one who backed into the tent while Noah was drunk and naked. And Noah's response isn't "Cursed be Seth." It's "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants he shall be to his brothers." So he curses his grandchild rather than his son, who was the one that was actually there and did anything. Okay, and then Exodus 11:4-6. Okay, this is a seriously famous one. I think everyone knows about this one. But and Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girls who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. They shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there never has been nor ever will be again." Okay, so this is one of the 10 plagues. It is because Egypt has enslaved Israel and it's refusing to let them go, refusing to acknowledge the Lord. And one of the punishments is that every firstborn in the land of Egypt dies. So it's a strong motivation to fathers they don't want that to happen. But that's what such a punishment does. Because of the sins of the fathers, the children end up receiving God's wrath. And that's the case here. Exodus 20:10, "You should not bow down to them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me." Another one is Deuteronomy 23:2, "No one born of a forbidden union may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of his descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord." So based on a forbidden union, for 10 generations, the kids can't go into the tabernacle or temple.
Have you
go ahead, I'm listening.
Have you ever counted the generations from Judah's child by Tamar to David? I think it may be just around 10 generations.
Oh, interesting.
I don't remember. I would, don't hold me to that, but I think it's about right.
Interesting. So this next one is Achan. This is another famous story where Achan hid stuff, and so they conquered was Ai, and Achan hid stuff in his tent rather than they were supposed to destroy everything. And the answer is Achan and his family is stoned with stones. Now, some people will argue, well, maybe they knew about it, or maybe they covered up for Achan, or maybe they were involved in it, that sort of thing. So, but the text doesn't say that. It just says that his family got stoned. And then, okay, this is another one, 2 Samuel 24:15 through 17. And the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel from the morning until the appointed time. And there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba 70,000 men. When this angel stretched out his hands toward Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who was working destruction among the people, it is enough now, stay your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Aruna, the Jebusite. And then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking the people and said, behold, I have sinned and done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house. So basically, David is saying those that were not caught up in, at least in this specific wickedness, but that they hadn't done it, but they were still taking the consequence, because David, again, is the king. He's the head of the nation of Israel. And so because he's united to them as their head and representative, the people are taking the punishment as well. Another example, 1 Kings 14:10. Therefore, behold, I will bring harm upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male, both bond and free in Israel, and will burn up the house of Jeroboam as a man burns up dung until it's all gone. So it was Jeroboam's sin, but his house is the one that's cut off. 1 Kings 21:29. Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he had humbled himself before me, I will not bring the disaster in his days, but in his son's days, I'll bring the disaster upon his house. Which again is a strong punishment of Ahab. By punishing his sons, he's punishing Ahab, because no father wants that to happen to their children for their own actions. Lamentations 5:7, which is kind of on the nose. Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we bear their iniquities. I mean, just pretty straightforward to the point. The Daniel 9:3 through 9. So basically, Daniel repents for the entire nation, and not just the nation, but what their fathers did in turning aside. And it's the reason why they ended up in captivity. And Daniel repents of the whole thing for everyone. There's like a similar situation in Nehemiah 1:6 through 7. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open, and hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments and statutes and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Again, this is in the context of the exile. Nehemiah and Ezra, they were basically born into the exile. So they weren't the ones that committed the sins that led to the exile, but he's still confessing them, because he's confessing the sins of his father that led to the exile. And well, I mean, I guess we could go on, but I think I just wanted to give just kind of an overview. Now, so we come back to Will's argument. So whatever he wants to make of Romans chapter 5 and the imputed sin of Adam, the concept of imputed sin is shot throughout the Old Testament. Now, hopefully, we're going to have a chance to look at it. Well, maybe actually we could just skip ahead and cover Ezekiel 18. That'd probably be good. It kind of maybe would go with the flow. So we'll probably do that next. But I just wanted to point out that the imputation of Adam's sin is, and the imputation of Christ's righteousness and the imputation of our sin to Christ, those are not the only examples of the imputation of sin throughout Scripture. And I think I think Will is in a pretty hard-pressed position there.
To your point, I agree with what you said, that it's shot throughout the Old Testament, and you just scratched the surface. We could bring up Ahab and the destruction of his entire family at God's explicit command for what Ahab had done. We could keep going. I mean, there's so many additional points that you haven't brought forward. And in the New Testament, there's an interesting verse that I thought was at least apropos to this objection, because part of his objection is they're held guilty of a crime they did not commit. And one of my pushbacks on this would be to say, although they did commit it, because they were in Adam, they committed it. When Adam committed it, they committed it. And a kind of more positive case is Hebrews 7, where Hebrews 7 talks about how the Levites are the ones who receive tithes. They don't pay tithes, but in verse 9 of chapter 7, the author of Hebrews says, "And as I may so say, Levi also, who receives tithes, paid tithes in Abraham, for he was yet in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him." Now, of course, we don't take that in a crude, I mean, at least I don't. I'm assuming you're also not a traditionalist. But if you are, then you would take it quite literally. And in which case, if you're fully a traditionalist, then you were literally in Adam when he committed his sin. But even I don't take it that way. I take it as that we're representatively in him because he's our ancestor. But also in Hebrews 7, it's not only the negatives that are also attributed. It's this paying of tithes, which is at least partly a positive. It's a right thing to do, to pay tithes, and Levi did that in Abraham because Abraham did it. And so to say that the crime they didn't commit, they didn't personally commit it, of course, I fully agree, but they were there in Adam. We are all there in Adam, and the only exception to that is Christ, because of the special way by which he came to be. He was conceived of the Virgin without outside the ordinary generation of human beings. So he doesn't have Adam as his father in that same sense we do. And therefore he wasn't in Adam in the same sense we are. And that sets Jesus apart from all the rest of humanity, including Jesus' own mother, as we have to point out with William to refer back to the other commenter. But I don't want to go there right now. You commented we want to go to Ezekiel 18. I think that's perfect. In fact, on Twitter, Stephen with a PH has asked us to do exactly that. And I know that that's one of the places that Hess does go to. So
we'll just jump right ahead to that, because actually exactly right. And thank you, Stephen, because that probably fits better with the flow. I split it between theological arguments and exegesis, but okay. So anyways, this makes sense to address right now. So Ezekiel 18, 19 through 20 say, "Yet you say, why should not the son suffer for the iniquity of the father? When the son has done what is just and right, and has been careful to observe all my statutes, he shall surely live. The soul who sins shall die. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself." Then this is Will's comment on the passage. This entire passage in Ezekiel wrestles with the idea of personal responsibility and sin. Essentially, children shall not inherit the guilt of the father, nor fathers inherit the guilt of the children. This passage is conveying the word of the Lord and how he views sin. God does not see it as just for anyone to inherit someone else's sin. The Lord says, the soul that sins shall die. So every person will be judged based on his own sins, not someone else's sins, transferred to their account via the reproductive act. And I'm just going to scratch off the reproductive act. I mean, that might have possibly applied to something weird Augustine said. I don't know, but it's certainly not my position that it goes to like some physical thing that's transmitted. All right. So I'll take a shot at this. So okay, hang on. Let's just pull up the text. Why not? And I'll actually pull up Jeremiah 31 as well. So it's a little less clear in Ezekiel 18 what's going on, and a little more clear in Jeremiah 31, but it's there both. Okay. The word of the Lord came to me saying, what do you mean by repeating this proverbs concerning the land of Israel? The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. Okay, so this is a proverb, a complaint in the land of Israel about having been punished for what their fathers did. And it came up around the time of the exile, at least we find it there. And what people are saying is, we're not the ones that caused ourselves to be in exile, but we're here in exile. But anyways, so then God responds, as I live, declares the Lord, this proverb shall no more be used by you in Israel. Okay, so it was previously used, but it's going to stop. All right, now I want to go down to Jeremiah 31, because I think you can see the same thing, but you can see it a little more clearly in Jeremiah 31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and the seed of beast. And it shall come to pass, it shall in the future come to pass, that as I have been watching over them to pluck up and break down, to overthrow, destroy, and to bring harm, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, declares the Lord. In those days they shall no longer say, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. But everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Each man who eats sour grapes, his teeth will be set on edge. And then, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord. And this is the very, very famous passage. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws within them. I will write them on their heart, and I'll be their God, and they shall be my people. I will no longer. So anyways, I think you get the point. Okay, so what I'm pointing to is the sequence. The sequence of event is that, this used to be a proverb and a complaint that sons were being punished for their father's sins. And this is a transition into a new covenant relation. Now, when you look at the two covenants, the old covenant was nationally with the nation of Israel and corporately as a body. And so in a case like that, corporate judgments are going to be very, very common, as you can expect, because the whole nation's getting hammered for what people within that corporate body were doing, with people within the nation were doing, what the leaders were doing. And we just saw a list of those types of things. But in the new covenant, it's much more individualistic, and and not so external, but it's internal. It's not the law, as in the law that governs the land and distinguishes the nation of Israel from other nations, but it's the law written on the heart. And with that comes kind of a new administration of the new covenant, which is much more individualistic. And I think that's what's going on here. But if that's right, then it shows that there's nothing inappropriate about the old covenant or corporate punishments, that it's just the new covenant is more fitting that there be a more individual focus, because it's not for every member of the nation. It's for the people that have had their hearts changed and the people that have God's laws written on their heart individually. So because of that, then there's this more individualized administration of that covenant in terms of God's own, I guess you could say, way of administering that individualized covenant. So I think that's what's going on. And so what that shows is it was never wrong to have corporate punishments, although it doesn't teach individual conversion very, very cleanly, I suppose you might say. So I think that's kind of the main way I would respond to this objection. There's more I could say, maybe a lot more I could say, but I think I've maybe said enough to get it going. Okay, what do you think on this one?
I see. I'm sure we could easily spend a full episode plus on Ezekiel 18. I see Ezekiel 18 within a larger context of 17 and 19, which are 17 begins with, if you could go back to like basically verse 1 of 17, and it says to put well, that's the, I wonder how similar it is. And I'll read the ESV there. The word of the Lord came to me, son of man, propound a riddle and speak a parable to the house of Israel. And so it has this parable / riddle, and there's this interesting symbolism with an eagle and a vine being planted and so forth. But as you go through, you see in verse 11, it says, moreover, the word of the Lord came to me saying, say now to the rebellious house, do you know what these things mean? Tell them. And so the context I'm taking this in is one in which Ezekiel is preaching to rebellious people. He's not preaching to godly people in their life. He's preaching primarily to rebellious people. And then the same thing, if you jump ahead to chapter 19, he begins that one by saying, take up a lamentation for the princes of Israel. And he continues on. He has very similar down to verse 14 or 13. It talks about she's planted in the wilderness in a dry and thirsty ground. Fire has gone out of a rod of her branches and has devoured her fruit, and she doesn't have a strong rod and a scepter to rule. It's a lamentation and so forth. So I put it in that context, that this is not this is less a message of hope and more a message of condemnation in chapter 18. And that what God is saying is, what you're saying when you tell this proverb, you say, oh, well, we have it bad and we're getting all this bad judgment on us, but it's not because of us, it's because of our fathers. And God is saying, no, I'll set that aside. You still have the same problem. You're also sinners. You're, as he said just a minute ago, you're rebellious. But he said, just let's set aside that. And even if you keep going down, it's not even just setting aside your fathers. It's setting aside what you did in the past. If you were a bad person in the past and you repent and do what's right, I'm not going to hold the past against you. Your own personal past. So that shows that God is full of mercy. He's willing to, if someone repents and turns to him, he's willing to forgive those sins. But the point is, so it's not limited to just cutting off ancestral guilt. It's even talking about cutting off personal guilt. But it would be a mistake to read that as saying that our own past guilt isn't worthy of guilt. But if you scroll back up, or you don't even have to scroll up, it's there. It says, the soul who sins this shall die. The son won't suffer for the iniquity of the father, the righteous, or the father for the iniquity of the son. Sorry, if you could just scroll up just a little bit more. You say, why would the son, just one more notch, I guess. So he says, as for his father, because he practiced extortion, robbed his brother, and did what was not good among the people, he shall die for his iniquity. But the son is the one who comes right before that, which he doesn't copy what his father does, then he is not punished. But the same thing is true not only about the son who doesn't follow the father, but also about the person who doesn't continue in their own wickedness as well. So repentance would extricate these people from their problem, whether it's an ancestral guilt, whether it's their own personal guilt. If they turn from their sins, then they won't die. And on just equally, if they've been doing wonderful things and they turn to sin, that will condemn them. That's also mentioned here. And he says, oh, you say I'm not things aren't equal, I'm not fair. Let's make it fair. But the problem is, and this is a mistake that the people are making, they don't need it to be fair. They need mercy because they're sinners. We're all sinners. If we have to be judged by the law, we're all going to fail. There's nobody who's going to benefit from Ezekiel 18's provision that if you don't do any sin, you're going to be good to go, because we all sin. So that maybe there's some in there, this point about if you turn from your sins, you'll live, is a message of hope, but it's only a hope for those who turn from their sins. And so considering the previous chapter and the following chapter, I don't think that the main intent of this is to say, oh, don't worry, everything's good for you. I think it's just the opposite. I think he's saying, don't try to use that as saying that I don't have any personal responsibility because I'm already doomed because of my parents' sins. I think that's the point. And that also equally applies to their own personal sins. So I don't take this as announcing a change in having the inheritance of guilt or anything like that. But anyway, those are my thoughts in a nutshell within our short time constraint that we have.
Right. Okay, great. No, I appreciate that. All right. Okay, let's go back to, so this one, we're getting into some Old Testament stuff. So the cleansing of the temple. So according to Will, sacrifices in the Torah were never meant to appease a wrathful God, but rather were to maintain a sacred space which represented God's presence among his people, where he tabernacled among them, enabled a personal relationship with the Almighty. He goes on in this in actually quite some depth, and basically says like the ritual system was the purging of the courtyards first, and then the purging of the holy place, and then the purging of the Holy of Holies. So it's this cleansing of the temple that's going on with the sacrifices. And then he also expounds on how the burnt offerings, when the smoke was supposed to ascend or rise up, and he takes it as symbolism, as basically he notes that in at least some of the sacrifices, people would enjoy and eat the sacrifices, eat the meat, and a portion was to be set aside for the Levites, and they would eat the meat also. And then he's basically saying, well, in the smoke offering, that's giving God a portion for God. So it's an oversimplification of his views, but it's kind of like, first you clean the house and you have a nice meal, and that's what's going on in Leviticus. So the first thing is that I disagree. It is just factually incorrect that the sacrifices in the Torah were never meant to appease a wrathful God. That's just wrong. Probably some of the more obvious examples are in here. I'll just pull it up, but Numbers. Here we go. Let's just go to number 16. This is, I don't know how famous this is. I've known about it. I know it quite well, but maybe not everyone else does, but I don't know. So we want. So I'll start in verse 41. But on the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned towards the tent of meeting, and behold, a cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came from the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put a fire on it from the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun." So Aaron took it, as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. Okay, so the statement that the sacrifices in the Torah, which Numbers is definitely a part of the Torah, the sacrifices in the Torah were never meant to appease a wrathful God, is wrong. Well, I guess I could pause. This is certainly not the only example. And let me just put a little stuff back. It's not the only example of this in the Old Testament. In fact, actually, there's a very similar episode in 2 Samuel where David takes a census, and it's a plague. I think it's a plague breaks out. And then David makes a sacrifice at a hilltop, and then the plague stops right at that point. So I guess wrath stops at that point. So there's other places like that. But I think more generally, there is language of cleansing the temple. Absolutely, that's absolutely true. But why? And I think the reason is stated because it is dangerous to approach the Lord in an unclean state. And there's actually passages where say, you better make the sacrifice to cleanse the holy space, because unless the Lord will break out against them, which is kind of this frankly gangster way to express it, but but it is not safe. People would die for this, and it's just because if people didn't ritually cleanse themselves and ritually cleanse the temple, they would die. So they had to do this. So I think that's one thing. Now, one other line of thinking to present is this idea, of course, that what exactly does it mean that God is wrathful? And there's passages in the Bible that will talk about God's anger, his wrath, his rage, those sorts of things. So what exactly do they mean? So certainly I'm a classic theist, and I definitely hold that God is impassive. He's perfect. So some people think of wrath or rage or those sort of thing like some hothead that just flies off the handle and acts irrationally because they're so angry. And that's absolutely not what's going on with God. It's a swift execution of perfect justice in dealing out punishment. That's what God's wrath is. And that punishment often involves separation from himself. And that is, I think that's what is behind the attributing wrath to God. Whereas sometimes in some of the criticisms that I've seen of penal substitution, it's more like, well, God's just a hothead. just blowing off his top, and he's going to find somebody to beat up, right? And no, that's not what's going on. So, anyways, with all that said, I think the main thing I would say about this is just wrong.
I agree that with you, the main thing, as you just said, it's wrong. You could add to the list from Numbers. You could add Numbers 18:5, and you shall keep the charge of the sanctuary and the charge of the altar, that there be no wrath anymore upon the children of Israel. So that keeping the charge of the sanctuary and the altar, a primary function of that is to prevent wrath on the children of Israel. The idea that God has...
Sorry, what was the reference? I apologize. I messed up.
Numbers 18:5.
18. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's good.
Yeah, no, I don't know what it says in the ESV, but I read the King James Version. You might scroll down there and see what it says. Yeah, there never again be wrath upon the children. But notice it's keeping guard over the sanctuary and over the altar. So the sanctuary and the altar. Now, it's true that these are, sacred spaces, but the notice that if anyone comes near, they should be put to death. And remember how scandalized the people were that Paul supposedly was bringing Gentiles into the temple. They thought, that really would be a horrible thing. And it's based on things like this, prohibitions like this, that you can't bring outsiders into the whole sacred space. But as far as God having wrath, there's numerous passages that explicitly talk about the Lord's wrath. One of the most interesting is Revelation 6:16, where the people say to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So it's not just God the Father that has wrath, it's also the Lamb who has wrath. It's the idea that God doesn't have wrath or something like that is a fundamental mistake. It's also interesting on the same page that you cited for this statement, and he doesn't back it up, at least on this page, he doesn't back it up. Again, my reading of the book is at this point quite limited, but he just kind of asserts that sacrifices I suppose he means the Torah, were never meant to appease a wrathful God. He just asserts this. There's no establishing it. And then he goes on to say that there appears to be two main interpretations on how the sacrifices in the Old Testament relate to mankind's sin: expiation, propitiation. The issue, he says, is the Hebrew definitions used in regard to these sacrifices seem to be dealing with expiation, not propitiation. The only place propitiation appears on the map is in the New Testament, but as you will see, it doesn't mean what it's often promulgated. So it's like he tries to say, well, the Hebrew doesn't mean propitiation. And then you point to First John, where it says 4:10 that he sent his son to be the propitiation for our sins, or he is the propitiation for our sins and not ours only, but for the sins of the whole world. Or the Romans 3:25, God has sent forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood. But then he says, well, but propitiation also doesn't mean. It's kind of frustrating. It's like he tries to say, well, the Hebrew words don't mean propitiation, and then but the Greek ones definitely mean propitiation. So what about that? And then he says, oh, and the propitiation also doesn't mean what we think it means. Like, oh, come on. It seems like he's just kind of like asserting after asserting.
Well, here actually, that's maybe the next logical place to go. It wasn't in order, but I'll go ahead and read that bit.
Oh wow, you had it. Okay.
So this is two quotes, one from page 112 and the other from 301. So where confusion takes place is the difference between averting and satisfaction. Aversion means that the wrath is no longer necessary, much like when a disobedient child repents and begins to behave himself, they have likely averted the wrath of the parents. If this is all people meant when they use the term propitiation, I doubt there'd be much controversy. Where the tension lies is in the definitional scope that propitiation can mean aversion, but it can also mean appeasement of wrath or satisfying of God, typically through means of a sacrifice. And then on page 301, he says, Where things get interesting is that PSA advocates generally take for granted that propitiation always means wrath appeasement, but this is not true. To be propitiated is simply to be rendered propitious in a state of being pleased and positively disposed towards another person. So the problem I have with this, okay, so for starters, just going back. So if God's wrath is his just punishment of sin, then I don't think it is sufficient to say justice is just set aside. It actually has to be satisfied, not just swept under the rug. And that's the main problem I have with this distinction. I think, yeah. So I think that's, well, I could go on. I think I would probably at this point drill in to Romans chapter 3, where propitiation is paralleled with justification and God being just in the just, and it's a public declaration of God's justice on the cross, and propitiation is wrapped right into that language. But I don't think, I don't need to go too far down that road, because I would just simply say this sounds good, but really what he's saying is justice gets swept under the rug.
Just somehow the wrath is just turned away, but not based on justice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could kind of say, well, outcome to the individual is the same, whether justice gets swept away, swept under the rug, or justice is satisfied. Either way, the outcome to the person is fine, but great. But no, it's that process where God does things the right way. It's probably the better way to say it.
Oh yeah, I don't, there's just so much of just assertion, and not much on demonstration so far from what we've been looking at. The fact is, to render propitious is, it's not, the point of that statement is not simply that the person is now propitious, but that they weren't before. They weren't favorably disposed, but now they are. That's what propitiation is. That's why people sometimes equate it with wrath appeasement. If you want to say that it's more than that, it's not just that God goes from being wrathful to neutral, but that he goes from wrathful to positively inclined, fine, but it's not less than that. It's not less than that he is now propitious. He's rendered propitious. He becomes propitious in some sense. You know, I noticed there was some comments in the foreword about not imputing change to God, and of course I agree. We shouldn't impute change to God, but that's not what we're saying when we talk about the appeasement of his wrath. It's just such a strange series of assertions.
All right. Okay, so let's keep trucking. Now I am discombobulated, but let me see where it makes sense to go.
Sorry.
No. All right, we'll come back to those. Okay, let's go. Let's do this. Let's go ahead onto the sin bearer. Well, no. Let's see. Where do we want to go?
As while you're thinking of that, one other verse: "Kiss the Son, lest in his wrath you perish," is one of those verses that comes to mind as well. Just that's Psalm 2:12. "Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all that they that put their trust in him." is just another example of God's wrath being propitiated, and it's not just the person of the Father, but also the person of the Son. Contrary.
Okay.
All right.
Go for it. Yeah, please.
I'll read Mr. Hess. So, contrary to popular belief, the sin offering is not given to satiate God's wrath and have someone's sins forgiven. This is a misunderstanding of the offering's intent. The sin offering was to restore one's damaged relationship with God by purifying the temple's holy space from the contagion of sin. In fact, sin offering is a poor translation, and due to the word's etymology, it would be better understood as purification offering. There are hints to this truth throughout Scripture, as the offering is also required after childbirth, upon completing a Nazirite vow, when dedicating a new altar, and so on. These acts are hardly sinful, and thereby to call this practice sin offering does not accurately convey what is taking place.
Okay, so I'll take a crack at it. So for starters, I think it's fair to say that the sin offering dealt with a bunch of things, including the childbirth and ritual impurity and stuff like that. So I think what is, and I'd like to focus on just the sin aspect itself rather than the childbearing or ritual impurity. But on the childbearing and ritual impurity, I would say that the language is such that if it's not dealt with, if you don't go through the ritual purity process, then you're cut off, right? So the consequences end up escalating really, really quickly if you don't actually deal with that too. So it's not that far off. But okay, so now in terms of the first sentence is almost misleading. Contrary to popular belief, the sin offering is not given to satiate God's wrath and have someone's sins forgiven. Let's just, if we just edited that sentence and take out the sin offering is not given to have someone's sin forgiven, it is the diametric opposite of the text. So here, let's go through it. So sorry. Here, I'll pull some references. Here we go.
Oh my.
Okay. I'm just going to read the last bit. Make an atonement for them, and they shall be forgiven. Make an atonement for his sins, and he shall be forgiven. The priest shall make an atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven. The priest shall make an atonement for him for the sins which he has committed, and he shall be forgiven. The priest shall make an atonement for him, the sins that he's committed, and he shall be forgiven. Thus the priest shall make an atonement for him for the sins which he has committed in any one of these things, and he shall be forgiven. The priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering, and he shall be forgiven. The priest shall make an atonement for him for the mistake that he made unintentionally, and he shall be forgiven. The priest shall make an atonement for him before the Lord, and he shall be forgiven. Okay. The point, this statement is, I would say, highly misleading. Now, in Will's favor, I'm sure what he's going to say is, well, it's all about the satiation of God's wrath, and that isn't explicitly in these texts. But the purpose, the fundamental purpose of the sin offering and the guilt offering is for the forgiveness of sins. And that cannot be missed. And once you have that, then what happens when you're forgiven of your sins? Then you're no longer under God's wrath. You're no longer under a sentence of condemnation. You're now in a right standing with God. So it's not so much about ritual purity or cleansing the holy space. It's about you've sinned and you need to be forgiven. So you make an offering. Now, you can, I think we're fully within justification to put it in context of lots of different pieces and say, well, it propitiates God's wrath, and that's the basis of the forgiveness that's received through the offering. But I guess even if I don't go there, just the fundamental purpose of the offerings is kind of really being missed here, unfortunately. Okay. Now another thing I did want to point out, and I'm actually very curious what you think and if you agree, but let me go through Leviticus 6. Here, I'll just save myself some typing and just go to 6. Okay. All right. I found this one interesting as I was digging through Leviticus in preparation for this, but the Lord spoke to Moses saying, if anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by deceiving his neighbors in a matter of deposit or security or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor or has found something lost and lied about it, swears falsely in any of the things that people do and sin thereby, if he has sinned and realized his guilt and will restore what he took by robbery or what he got by oppression or the deposit that was committed to him or the lost thing that he found or anything about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore it in full and shall add a fifth to it and give it to him to whom it belongs on the day he realizes his guilt. And he shall bring to the priest as his compensation. The compensation can also be translated as a guilt offering. To the Lord, a ram without blemish out of the flock, or its equivalent, for a guilt offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for him before the Lord, and he shall be forgiven. Okay. So I wanted to draw attention to the fact that there's two acts that take place. So if I have harmed Will, I would. So this gives you an example of a matter of security deposit. So if I defrauded Will, I've got to pay Will back for the money that I defrauded him of. And if I defrauded him of $100, I have to add a fifth. So I pay him $120, not just the $100 that I stole from him, but 120. But I'm not done yet. Because what else do I have to do? Then I've got to go to the priest and bring a compensation to the Lord. Right? It's not enough for me to pay Will Hess back. I've got to make a compensation to the Lord for what I've done. And then I'm forgiven. All right. So now putting this, I was thinking this through. The best way I can think of this in common parlance and today's terms, to me, I would say that the first part of paying back every penny that I stole from Will plus 20% is what I would call, in today's terms, restitution. It's balancing that out to the victim itself. In that restitution, so if I commit a crime, I might go to jail. How does going to jail help the victim? Maybe it gives them some peace of mind or something like that. But if I harmed the victim, then come the lawsuits, right? And there's a civil suit. So in the criminal suit, that's what puts me behind bars. But in the civil suit, that's where I have to cut a check to the victim for who I've harmed. So the first part of the restitution of paying Will back the $100 plus fifth, so 120, that is man-to-man restitution. And so that's kind of at a horizontal level. But the criminal aspect is vertical, right? We have to deal with God's justice. Now, if restitution is a part of justice, why wouldn't we think that the compensation made to the Lord is also a satisfaction of justice? In other words, my paying Will the $120 back satisfies restitutional justice, why wouldn't my compensation to the Lord be in satisfaction of criminal justice? Okay. What you thinking?
Could you jump back to the slide with his that
Yes.
you were responding to?
Yeah, I got pretty far from well, didn't I? All right, here we go. Back to.
So I took a peek at the footnote he provides, because here at least he doesn't just assert, he cites some source that source doesn't support what he just said there. So yeah, in general, he's citing Michael Heiser, a video from September 12, 2022. In the section that he cites relates to a different offering, which with a different not the sin offering, but the guilt offering, which Heiser doesn't think is a good translation. And I would not recommend anyone to go to Heiser as a source for these kinds of things. He has some weird ideas that tend to mislead people, even though he's a smart guy, no doubt, but he has a lot of strange ideas, like his Council of the Gods ideas and some other ideas that I just really recommend people stay as far as they can away from him. However, even he doesn't make this assertion that sin offering is a poor translation, and that due to the word's etymology, it would be better understood as a purification offering. Certainly not in the section that was the section of the video that's cited. And I think even if you fixed the citation, the word's etymology, I mean, the sin offering is called sin offering in translation because the same word that's translated sin offering, the same root Hebrew word translated as sin offering, it's translated as sin 100 in the King James. We'll just focus on the King James as an example because I have the data for the King James. It's this word is translated sin 182 times. It's translated sin offering 116 times. It is translated as purification for sin or purifying 3 times. But to suggest that it's a poor that sin offering is a poor translation, and that it would be better to understand it as purification due to the etymology, if that's what he's saying, I'm not sure if he's saying that because of the way the sentence is written, which is not the clearest writing. I can't tell if he's saying that it's poor and the poor translation is due to the word's etymology, which would be at least sort of reasonable. But it looks like he's saying that due to the word's etymology, you should understand it as purification offering.
That's what he's saying. Yeah.
But the words, it's a word for offense or sin. That's the etymology of the word. It can also refer to the penalty, the sacrifice for it, and so forth. But it's specifically about sin. Now, granted, maybe there are times when the offense that's referenced isn't sin. Maybe, I don't know, but certainly there's many cases where it is sin. And it's such a strange. Some of these claims are just so strange. Even Michael Heiser, who as I said, it's not a reliable source, doesn't even take that extreme view. He doesn't like focusing on sin. He criticizes this. He wants to talk about, instead of guilt offering, he wants to talk about reparations or something like that. But he doesn't address the type of argument you just presented, which is that in what way is a reparation? And anyway, he goes on to talk about the Passover lamb, that there is substitution there in that same video. Heiser does. Now, I don't know if Hess adopts that part of the Heiser's view or not, but certainly Heiser's an Old Testament scholar and he has a big following. But I would really suggest people stay away from him, and that might be part. I mean, some of his more quirky ideas can lead you really far off track. I wish I had done more responding to Heiser during his life, but I may not. I should also continue what I started at that time.
So, question from Perenni. According to Hess, where did the contagion of sin in the holy place come from exactly? So he's got this idea of what he calls aerosolized sin. Basically, it's in the air. But I mean, I think that's figurative language, but that's where he goes with it. I don't want to drill too deep on it because even having read it, I'm a little fuzzy on it. But I think that's the general picture. It's just being around sin is the reason why the temple needs to be cleansed. But I need to be very clear, though. The temple is cleansed through sacrifices and the application of the blood of the sacrifices. That much is true. The New Testament is clear that that people were cleansed by the blood of those sacrifices. It says that the Old Testament sacrifices were good for the purification of the flesh, and the New Testament sacrifices are good for the purification of the conscience. New Testament sacrifice is for the cleansing of the conscience. Alrighty, let's see how much time we have. 15 minutes. Okay, so okay, well, we could do a couple things. We could do Psalm 22. My God, why have you thou forsaken me? We could do sin bearing, and we could do the analogy of taking a bullet. Why don't you take your pick?
Let's bite the bullet and jump on that grenade.
Okay.
To really mix our metaphors up here.
All right. Biting the bullet. Let's bite. This is a bullet. Okay. Jesus dying for us does not mean he died to satisfy anyone's justice or wrath, but instead he gave himself for them, much like when someone jumping in front of a bullet to save someone else. The person catching the bullet died for his friend. He did not incur anyone's wrath besides the one who fired the bullet. Satan fired the bullet to introduce sin into God's creation, and Jesus jumped in front of it to save us. Okay. Okay, a couple thoughts. Jumping in front of a bullet for somebody is... So if you take penal substitutionary atonement, it's not an atonement, and it's not penal, but it is a substitution. So I give him a little bit of credit there. We're taking one step in the right direction. Now, there were 17 steps backwards. So there's many problems with the analogy itself, because, presumably the victim is innocent. There's no justice question that's being addressed here. It doesn't explain why God remains just and the justifier of sinners. And death, it's not merely Satan's act or natural consequence. So Satan can act as the executioner, like we see in the excommunications. It's sometimes described as delivering a person over to Satan for the destruction of the body, but the flesh shall be saved. But so that it's by God's permission that Satan can act as that executioner. So we're not saying. So death is ultimately a punishment from God, even though God can allow Satan to play an instrumental role in death. That's for sure. But I think where the analogy struggles is maybe a little bit here. He didn't incur anyone's wrath besides the one who fired the bullet. Firing of the bullet. Well, who fired the bullet? Right? Well, in Romans 8, we're told that God did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all. So if that's the firing of the bullet, then it is God's wrath. And the bullet analogy backfired. But I think more to the point, though. I think I would probably just say, taking a bullet is probably a good illustration of substitution, but not so much of penal substitution. It's just a different type of substitution. But, just God's wrath, God's judgment. It's not some type of like arbitrary violence or crime or something like that. No, it's a moral necessity by which God justly condemns sin. Okay. I guess I'll stop there.
It's so weird to me that he's putting I noticed Stephen says, doesn't this imply conflict in the Trinity? And what would there be to stop God from firing again? But he doesn't want to put God into the picture. Oddly enough, he starts to sound like there's shades of a second negative force that God is not involved with. This is Satan doing this, not God doing it, just Satan doing this. Not that Satan is firing the bullet because God told him he could, or God instructed him to, but just somehow sua sponte, he's firing this bullet, and the consequence of the bullet is death. But with no sense, this metaphor just takes any sense of justice out of the equation. And that's not the way the Bible describes it. Not only is it, of course, Satan is a liar from the beginning, but the idea that Satan is the one who brings judgment. Look at the proto-evangelium. Look at Genesis. It's Genesis 3, right? Look at how God describes it. He doesn't say that the Satan shot the bullet or something like that. God brings judgment on this. So the serpent was more subtle. He says various things to Eve, and after this, verse 8, they heard the voice of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves. Then verse 9, the Lord called unto Adam and said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." He says, "Who told you you're naked? Have you eaten of the tree that I told you not to eat?" And the man said, "The woman who you gave me, she gave me to eat, and I ate." And the Lord said to the woman, "What's this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent beguiled me, and I ate." And the Lord said unto the serpent, "Because you have done this, you're cursed." So the judgment begins with Satan. The serpent is Satan. The judgment begins with him, but it doesn't stop there. He also says to the woman, "I'm going to greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception." And then he also says to Adam, "Because you hearken to the voice of your wife." Go ahead.
Hang on, I'll pause here. So yeah, Franny says this is some weird stuff. Speaking of weird stuff, Will's comment on this passage: "In the dust you shall eat all the days of your life." He says, well, man came from dust. Therefore, what this means is that Satan has the power to kill man and eat man.
That's an interesting take, to which the response is read Job. That's part of the response. Read Job. See what happens when Satan wants to touch Job. God says, "Do whatever you want, but don't touch him. Don't take his life. That's God is still in control of who Satan can and can't kill, even though Satan is capable of killing people. However, God begins with judging the serpent. Then he curses. He provides a curse on the woman and on Adam as well, and even curses the ground for Adam's sake. And so the judgment begins with all three being judged, not the serpent. The serpent doesn't just fire some bullet at the people, but everyone gets judged in this process. Now, the other thing is to remember that the very name Satan it's the word accuser. That's the title that Satan has. His title is the accuser. He's the one who brings accusation of sin. It's a forensic legal concept. He's the one who says, hey, that person sinned. He's accusing that person of sin. And when you stand in front of and you take that accusation of sin on yourself, if you want to put it that way, you want to put the accusations of Satan are the bullet, Jesus does take those. But that's entirely in the legal consequence. He takes those accusations, not in terms of saying, I actually did those things, but instead saying, I will take the punishment that's due to the sins that you're accusing the people of. So within that metaphor, it's not that there's no legal sin and consequence or judgment and punishment connotation, but exactly the opposite. It's exactly the punishment for the sin that Jesus takes and destroys the power of the accusation. His accusation's there, but there's a punishment to go with it. And so he's destroying the power of death that Satan has through his own death. That's I don't want to go too long, so I know time is limited. I don't know how much more you wanted to say on this point.
No, that's all good stuff. And I think, what was it? Stephen asked the question of what about the Trinity? Maybe we can close on Psalm 22, because that might not be a bad one to. All right, here, let me see if I can put this on the screen. Okay, Psalm 22. So Psalm 22:1 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? So Will's comment is, this is called a remez, meaning in reference to, Jesus is making a quick reference to the entirety of Psalm 22 by quoting its beginning. If you read the psalm, you will notice that the suffering servant feels forsaken by God because he is suffering at the hands of his enemies. The psalmist explains that mankind are the ones who despised him while piercing his body, verses 16 and 17. The psalm then states God does not despise the afflicted, but rather hears their cry. What transpires next is God responding in love, not wrath, to those that are hurting. The psalm ends with the pronouncement of God's victory and good news. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to the people yet unborn, that I have done it. Jesus was not saying that he was forsaken by God. Okay, that last sentence is bad but it shows what he's actually saying. Because it's a little subtle. But I think what he's saying is that the suffering servant feels forsaken by God, but is wrong that he is forsaken by God. And the reason, my evidence for accusing Will of that is that last sentence where he says Jesus was not saying that he was forsaken by God, which is the exact opposite of what Jesus said on the cross. Now, when you look at the psalm itself, it's kind of more of a progression thing. Like there's real suffering and there's real, I'd say, forsakenness in the sense of, why are you so far from saving me? Right? And in the same sense, on the cross, the Father was not sparing Jesus from the cross. He had the power to. He could have sent 12,000 angels, as Christ said he could call down. It'd be trivial for the Father to spare Christ the cross, but he didn't. And that's the sense in which he was forsaken. Now, it's not in the sense that God ever stopped loving Jesus. They had one plan. They were united in this plan. They're united in their being, and in terms of eternal generation, that certainly was never disrupted. And Jesus Christ, when he was suffering and when he died, he was suffering in his humanity and he was dying in his humanity, not in his divine nature. But because his divine nature is impassive and eternal, so he's not going to die. So the psalm is basically, there's real pain, real suffering, real forsakenness in the sense of not being saved from that suffering. And then afterwards, there's real deliverance. We can look at the actual psalm itself. It's probably worthwhile. But I think that's the issue. So whereas I would say that this is kind of a sequence thing, Psalm 22. Okay. Like I would say it's sequence, right? He was forsaken and then delivered, rather than saying he thought he was forsaken, but he really wasn't. I don't think that's the right answer. So, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? And then the contrast is down below. But you, Lord, do not be far off. Oh, you, my help, come quickly to my aid. So just think about that. Come quickly to my aid. That means at some point, the suffering servant needed aid. So it's sequence. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will tell your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All the offspring of Jacob glorify him, and stand in awe of him, you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the afflictions of the afflicted. He has not hidden his face from him, but he has heard when he cried to him. For you come, from you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vow I will perform before those who fear him. The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. So notice the sequence, right? The afflicted, they are afflicted, but they shall in the future eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. Okay. So anyways, I would just say that this is a matter of sequence of being forsaken in the sense of salvation is far, and then receiving the salvation later. So sequence, not I thought I was forsaken, but I actually wasn't. And just so you know, Jesus knew everything. So he's not going to make that kind of mistake. All right.
What he said about the verse reminded me of some similar argumentation I've heard from James White on the same verse. I don't have the specific citations in front of me, but I've heard some similar point that, so the part I would kind of grant to Hess on this is that the quoting the beginning of the psalm is intended as a reference to the whole psalm. I don't disagree with that point about it, but it's one thing to say that that's the point, and it's another thing to say that and Jesus doesn't really mean the first part of the psalm. He only means some other part of the psalm. I don't think that doesn't make a lot of sense. That to say that Jesus only means the later part. Now, there is no rift in the Trinity. The Father is not against the Son, and the second person of the Trinity hasn't been forsaken by the first person of the Trinity in some as to the divine nature. But as to the human nature, he is suffering. The impassible God is experiencing the passion of Jesus Christ according to his humanity. The immortal God is experiencing mortality in the person of Jesus Christ according to his humanity. There's a lot more that I could say. I love this psalm for lots of reasons. It's a psalm that has come up in my discussion with the it has come up in my discussion with the King James because of the unicorns that appear in as a mistranslation in verse, I think it's around, I forget where it is. So it's wild oxen in the translation you just read. Verse 21. The King James, instead of wild oxen, has unicorns because of a mistranslation from going back to the Septuagint. It's the word reem, and it refers to a wild species of ox. So the aurochs or reem is that, yeah, they call it says unicorns. It's just a minor, it's just a small thing that can be improved in the King James Version. But the next verse as well, I will declare thy name unto my brethren, is one of those things that the Roman Catholics don't like because of the reference to Jesus' brothers. They don't. It's yet another. In this case, prophetically, David speaking in the mouth of Jesus, about Jesus' brothers. And maybe there's more clear passages in the New Testament about it, but just one of those passages. But ultimately, they see that they are parting his garments. He can tell all his bones. The New Testament says this is clearly about Jesus. And he's referencing this, knowing that this is exactly what's happening to him, that he's being encompassed by dogs. The assembly of the wicked has enclosed him. They pierced his hands and his feet. He tells all his bones. They parted his garments and cast lots for his vesture. And he's calling out to the Lord for strength and help and deliverance. And that deliverance isn't going to come until the resurrection, but it will come. So he is going to be under the power of death for a short time, but he will rise again. So the idea that Jesus, according to his humanity, can't feel forsaken by God is a mistake. He can feel that, and also at the same time know that that he's not out of his control or the Father's control. In fact, Jesus says explicitly he had the power to lay down his life and to take it up again. He doesn't have. It's not that the Trinity is splintered by the crucifixion. It's that Jesus, according to his humanity, carries things that are not proper to the divine nature. And I don't. Maybe it's a little bit confusing, but I don't see why Hess is taking this the direction he's taking it. Maybe he sees people too strenuously argue from verse 1 of the psalm that forsaken has to mean something, and then he just applies that forsaken, instead of applying it to Christ according to his humanity, tries to apply it to Christ according to his divinity. And in which case it's just a problem that he hasn't correctly considered the fact that Jesus is not only God, but God and man. So I don't know. Certainly verse 2, I cry in the daytime, but you don't hear in the nighttime. He's not, and I'm not silent. And if you can go down to the those parts about the tell all my bones, clearly that did happen. But does God, according to his divinity, have bones? Does God have clothes according to his divinity? No. But this is not talking about according to his divinity. It's kind of talking about according to Christ's humanity. So I don't know. I'm kind of left mystified by Hess's points, but I guess that is what it is.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. So we're at an hour and 38. So I think at this point, I'll just pull this down. I've been kind of pulling comments in along the way.
Yeah.
So I think we could probably start to wrap up if that's okay with you.
Sure. I'll quickly thank the people whose names come up here. Stephen with a PH, for any cosmic ontogeny. Michelle Sharik, AJV, Servant of Christ, SDG. Somebody from Twitch who wants me to get more viewers. Kevin's Biblical Discussions. Good to see you here. Good to see you, Discerner, who was also the first to comment. And Sequoia English 1. Glad you made it. And I probably missed somebody. Oh, here's Go Arrow Slim, who's the one who wanted to greet Mary here. The Bark Barks. Glad you made it here. And I probably have overlooked somebody in the process of going through here too quickly, but if so, it was not deliberate. Thank you all for being. Oh wait, here it is. So, oh no, that one I did cover. Thought I found my mistake, but I didn't. So anyway, thank you one and all for being here, and I hope it's edifying, and I hope that it's helping you, Dan, to prepare for your conversation, which is coming in January, right?
Yeah, January 9th. Looking forward to it. And thank you for all the comments. And thank you, TurretinFan, for your excellent thoughts. And God be with you.
And also with you.